Which BTS member is the most patient and emotionally resistant when facing the incredibly heavy pressures of the entertainment industry? Being a global superstar certainly brings serious stress, from packed schedules to public criticism. Each member has their own way of managing their daily emotions. Well, today we are going to discuss the ranking of the patience and emotional resilience levels of the 7 BTS members based on general observations and their interactions over time. Let's see who reacts the fastest and who is the calmest.
Number 7. Jimin. Many fans might have already guessed that Jimin is in this position because he is known to be very expressive and always shows his feelings directly without holding back. Psychologically, highly perfectionist people tend to have a shorter patience threshold for themselves. Jimin is often seen getting very frustrated when he makes even the slightest mistake on stage or during dance choreography practice. He does not hold back his emotions and tends to react quickly to the situations around him. Jimin's emotional resilience is actually very strong in the long run because he always manages to bounce back and fix his mistakes, but in his immediate responses, his feelings are quite easily triggered. An interesting psychological fact here is that this perfectionist trait is often directly related to momentary stress levels, where a person will continuously repeat an activity until it is truly perfect without resting. As a real-life example, when we try to assemble complicated home furniture and keep failing to attach one part, the annoyance and impatience that instantly arise are very similar to what Jimin often experiences when practicing vocals or dancing. However, it is precisely this very open and expressive nature that makes him highly liked by many fans, as he looks very honest and does not try to hide his frustration. He is also very responsive to the emotions of the other group members, which means his natural empathy works very quickly. So even though he might not be the most patient individual when it comes to hiding instantaneous reactions or holding back annoyance, his perseverance to keep trying is a different form of patience.
Number 6. V. The next position is occupied by V, who has a very deep emotional response and is sensitive to injustice or things not going according to plan. V is the type of person who processes emotions internally before finally showing them to the public. Yet his facial expressions often cannot hide the fact when he feels uncomfortable or is losing his patience. His emotional resilience has been tested through various public criticisms and media spotlight since he first debuted with the group. He might look calm on the outside, but he actually has a very high emotional sensitivity that makes him easily disturbed by situations that are too noisy or disorganized. A relevant additional piece of information here is that people with highly artistic personalities who focus on visual details often have a lower tolerance level for sudden disturbances that ruin their concentration. Imagine when you are focused on an important task and suddenly there is very loud music from a neighbor. The annoyance that instantly arises is a fitting example to describe how V's patience can thin out in unconducive situations. Nevertheless, V proves that emotional resilience does not mean never feeling angry, but rather the ability to keep working professionally despite facing a lot of outside pressure. He more often chooses to stay silent and walk away when angry, which shows his effort to control the situation as best as possible. Of course, a person's patience level can fluctuate, and the details can vary depending on the source and the time of our observation of their routines. Number 5. Jungkook. As the youngest member of the group, Jungkook occupies this position because he has a combination of a highly competitive attitude and an emotional maturation process that happened right in front of many people's eyes. He often shows impatience when competing in games or when he feels his performance on stage does not meet the high standards he sets for himself. Even so, his emotional resilience remains extraordinary because he had to adapt to celebrity life from a very young age without having much free time.
Jungkook tends to react with action when he feels frustrated, such as practicing harder or pushing himself, which sometimes shows that he lacks patience with his own physical limitations. A fact about this behavior is that a competitive attitude often masks emotional vulnerability, as the drive to always win is their way of maintaining control over uncertain situations. If we take an everyday example, this is much like someone who just learns to play a video game and immediately chooses the highest difficulty level. When they fail, they do not give up because they are patient, but they keep trying because they do not want to be defeated by the game system. Jungkook manages his stress by channeling his emotions into various new activities, ranging from working out to creating visual arts. His ability to absorb stress and turn it into new skills proves that his emotional resilience continues to grow stronger and more stable, along with increasing age, maturity, and the many life experiences he has gone through.
Number 4. J-Hope. Taking the fourth position, we have J-Hope, who is an incredibly fascinating and complex figure when we dive deep into the discussions about patience, mental endurance, and emotional resilience. Primarily because he single-handedly balances two entirely different and often conflicting sides of responsibilities in his daily professional life. On one side of the spectrum, he is globally recognized by the public, the media, and millions of fans as the member who consistently radiates positive emotions, boundless cheerfulness, and continuously provides a safe, uplifting energy to absolutely everyone around him, earning him the well-deserved nickname of the group's Sunshine. On the other side of this spectrum, however, he holds the highly demanding official role of the performance and dance leader for the group, a critical position that demands an absolute, uncompromising level of patience, strictness, and authoritative firmness. To truly understand the immense depth of J-Hope's patience level, we have to look literally and analytically at what he actually does behind closed doors while in the practice room for hours on end. Teaching intricate, high-intensity dance choreography to 6 other adult men who all possess completely different baseline skill levels, varying degrees of physical stamina, and entirely different cognitive learning styles is a monumental task that severely drains both physical energy and mental bandwidth. He has to meticulously pay attention to every microscopic detail of body movement, ranging from the exact angle of the arms, the precise positioning of the feet, the overarching posture of the spine, to the flawless timing synchronized with the specific beat of the music. And then he must correct those inevitable mistakes repeatedly without stopping, sometimes for days or weeks leading up to a major comeback or a world tour. This relentless repetition process naturally requires a remarkably high tolerance for frustration, a psychological trait that is incredibly difficult to build. When someone keeps making the exact same mistake, even after being taught and corrected multiple times, the most natural, impulsive human response is to get angry, raise one's voice, or simply give up in exhaustion. But J-Hope has to actively suppress that natural biological and emotional response to achieve the absolute perfection of the group's performance that the world expects. However, his patience is not limitless. It has very clear, rational, and professional boundaries, and those boundaries are deeply rooted in discipline and work ethic. When mistakes happen due to a blatant lack of concentration, physical exhaustion aside, or an unserious, playful attitude during critical rehearsal times, J-Hope is famously known to instantly and dramatically change his bright, cheerful demeanor into a very strict, intimidating, and serious one. Many of his fellow group members have honestly and openly admitted in various interviews and documentaries that they are exceptionally careful and highly focused during practice sessions because they absolutely do not want to see a disappointed, stern, or angry look on J-Hope's face, which speaks volumes about the immense respect he commands. An interesting casual fact about human behavior in high-stakes professional environments shows that people who are officially in charge of maintaining strict work quality standards usually have to build a very thick emotional wall to separate their personal friendships from their objective performance evaluations. This specific situation highly requires advanced emotional intelligence because criticizing your own close friends, pointing out their flaws, and pushing them to their physical limits without permanently ruining the personal friendship or creating a toxic work environment is a remarkably difficult balancing act to perform continuously over the span of a decade. As a highly relevant and easy-to-understand everyday example, imagine you are a senior project manager in a fast-paced corporate office, and your immediate team is entirely filled with your own closest childhood friends. When the multi-million-dollar project schedule is very tight, the deadline is looming, and one of your best friends keeps making careless data calculation errors because they are unfocused or sleepy, you have to reprimand them sternly and objectively to save the entire team's hard work and reputation, even though you are fully aware that your harsh reprimand might make the atmosphere incredibly awkward during your lunch break later that afternoon.
The constant internal pressure to perfectly balance this professional firmness with warm interpersonal relationships is exactly what tests and stretches J-Hope's emotional resilience every single day. Besides that heavy leadership burden, we also have to extensively discuss the psychological concept of emotional labor regarding his role as the group's cheerful figurehead. Maintaining a bright, happy expression, laughing freely at everyone's jokes, and always responding to other people's interactions positively even when his own body is physically exhausted to the bone after a grueling 3-hour stadium concert requires an extraordinarily massive and constant supply of mental energy. In the realm of psychology, there is a concept known as surface acting versus deep acting, where faking happiness or actively hiding severe fatigue in public continuously often causes a specific type of psychological burnout and mental exhaustion that is actually much more severe and damaging than the physical exhaustion itself. Yet, astonishingly, J-Hope is able to maintain this incredible consistency of positive emotion and warm energy for years of his highly scrutinized career, which solidly proves that he has developed a very strong, heavily fortified internal emotional regulation mechanism, making him incredibly patient in serving the demanding public's expectations of his persona. He seems to process all that intense, overwhelming pressure in a very structured, methodical way, which is often reflected in how he is known to be very neat, clean, and highly organized in his personal living spaces and daily life. People who meticulously maintain regular schedules, constantly clean their rooms, and have their belongings neatly arranged usually use that external physical order as a subconscious coping mechanism to maintain their internal mental order and sanity amidst a highly chaotic, unpredictable, and loud work environment. By controlling what he can, like the neatness of his clothes or the schedule of his day, he builds the patience needed to handle what he cannot control. In conclusion, J-Hope's legendary patience is deeply and immovably rooted in his profound sense of responsibility toward his craft, his grueling work, and his beloved colleagues. Yet he remains in the fourth position because he is the type of leader who will absolutely not hesitate to show his impatience and sternness directly and immediately if it is necessary to maintain the team's overall discipline and safety. It must also be carefully noted that this detailed observation is primarily based on various broadcasted interactions, behind-the-scenes documentaries, and interviews, and of course, the nuanced details of human behavior can naturally vary depending on the specific source, the time period, as well as their private internal dynamics that are obviously not recorded on camera. But J-Hope's unwavering dedication to holding back his own ego and personal exhaustion for the sake of the group's flawless collective performance is a concrete fact that cannot be denied by anyone who has closely observed their phenomenal career journey so far.
His true emotional resilience heavily lies in his rare, masterful ability to smoothly switch from being a fun, loud, and comforting friend to a highly disciplined, eagle-eyed dance instructor without ever losing control over his own baseline emotions, a complex interpersonal skill that can only be mastered through immense maturity, intense self-awareness, and a specific type of patience that is actively trained and tested consistently over time, making him an irreplaceable pillar of strength for the entire team in every situation.
Number 3. Jin. In the third position, we find Jin, the oldest member of the globally renowned group, who offers a profoundly unique, incredibly refreshing, and highly effective form of patience and emotional resilience that is very often completely misunderstood or overlooked by casual observers who only look at his handsome visuals or playful antics briefly. To truly grasp the magnitude of his patience, we must first understand the cultural context. In traditional South Korean cultural structures, the age factor plays an incredibly central and deeply rooted role in all daily social interactions and group dynamics. Older individuals are generally expected by society to behave very authoritatively, hold full operational control over the younger members, demand strict obedience, and always be absolutely respected in a very formal, rigid manner by anyone who is younger than them. However, Jin consciously, intentionally, and consistently chooses not to use that highly advantageous social privilege rigidly, essentially dismantling the traditional hierarchy to foster a healthier team environment. His daily decision to often act relaxed, frequently throw simple, lighthearted dad jokes, and even willingly let himself be teased, playfully scolded, or pranked by members who are much younger than him, requires an extraordinarily huge level of patience, extreme self-confidence, and massive ego suppression. Choosing to intentionally lower one's own established social position and authority simply to make others feel more comfortable, equal, and heard is an action that requires a remarkably high level of emotional resilience because it directly goes against the natural human psychological drive to show dominance, maintain power, or constantly seek authoritative acknowledgement from people around them. Jin's main overarching philosophy in facing the various, often crushing life pressures and the insane work stress of the global music industry is his spectacular cognitive ability to completely let go of negative thoughts, criticisms, and failures very quickly. A bit of interesting, highly applicable psychological info regarding this specific trait. There is a well-known concept in behavioral psychology called rumination, which is a person's toxic mental habit of thinking about a bad event, a past mistake, or a negative feeling repeatedly without stopping, essentially playing the bad memory on an endless loop in their head. This constant rumination is exactly what often causes baseline stress levels to rise sharply over time and frequently leads to much more serious mental health problems like severe anxiety and long-term burnout. Jin actively, consciously refuses to ruminate on negativity. When he inevitably faces a problem, receives harsh criticism, or experiences a personal failure, he processes the objective facts of the situation briefly, logically figures out what exactly went wrong without getting overly emotional, and then literally forces his brain to stop thinking about it any further, completely shutting the door on the negative emotion. He will immediately and deliberately shift his focus to other, more comforting activities, like playing his favorite video games for hours, going fishing in absolute silence, or eating delicious food with his friends. The rare cognitive ability to bounce back quickly from this highly stressed condition is often professionally called emotional elasticity, and Jin possesses this trait in abundance. As a highly relatable, real-life, everyday example to truly understand how difficult this mental pivot is, imagine you just made a huge, embarrassing mistake during a critical, career-defining presentation in front of the entire board of directors and the CEO of the company you work for. The general, completely normal reaction of most people would be feeling very ashamed, locking themselves in the bathroom stall to panic, completely losing their appetite for the whole day, avoiding their coworkers, and continuously blaming themselves every single time they remember that humiliating moment for weeks or even months. However, someone who has developed a highly resilient mindset just like Jin would certainly acknowledge the presentation mistake, apologize rationally and professionally in the moment, and then, at the lunch break, they would enthusiastically invite their coworkers to eat their favorite meal, while occasionally genuinely laughing at their own awkwardness, truly and completely closing the book on that bad event for the day, without letting it define their self-worth.
This absolutely does not mean he doesn't care about his work quality. Rather, he possesses the deep wisdom to know that continuing to be sad, angry, or depressed will not magically change what has already happened in the past and will only actively ruin his mental state and performance for tomorrow. Additionally, Jin's legendary patience is also tangibly, undeniably proven through his incredibly arduous technical journey as a performing artist. Unlike some other members who already had a strong, naturally gifted singing or dancing foundation built over years before joining the entertainment agency, Jin had to learn all those highly complex technical skills from the absolute most basic beginner level at a relatively slower, older age compared to his peers, which naturally makes the physical learning process much harder for the body. Training the vocal cords to hit high notes consistently, mastering diaphragmatic breathing while jumping, and memorizing highly complicated, fast-paced dance choreography require many thousands of very boring, painful, and exhausting physical practice. Sitting alone in front of a mirror in a cold practice room, repeating the exact same vocal note over and over again until his throat hurts, recording it, listening back to his own vocal mistakes, and repeating it all over again in the middle of the night when the other members might be resting or sleeping is a form of pure, incredibly silent and lonely patience. There are no loud audience cheers, no clapping, and no cameras when he practices alone. There is only pure technical frustration and physical fatigue that he must patiently defeat entirely independently. This relentless, quiet patience ultimately paid off in the most spectacular way, resulting in a very significant, universally praised improvement in his vocal quality and stability throughout his long career. Furthermore, Jin also essentially takes on the crucial psychological role of the primary icebreaker and mood regulator within the group's internal dynamic. When the atmosphere in the room is very tense due to the sheer exhaustion of a grueling world tour schedule, or there is a serious, heated disagreement backstage right before a show, Jin is very often the first person to bravely throw a funny sentence, make a silly face, or perform an entertaining action specifically to break the suffocating tension and disarm the anger. Comforting highly stressed, tired, or angry people requires immense courage and the rare empathic ability to absorb the heavy negative energy in the room without getting personally affected or dragged down by it. Jin effortlessly becomes a passive, steadying mediator who entirely neutralizes the room's volatile atmosphere just with his emotionally consistent, warm presence. This seemingly simple, effortless calmness is actually the final result of a very long, complex rationalization and very strict internal self-control, making him, without a doubt, one of the members with the most rock-solid, stable mental resilience. Even though we logically know that the specific details can naturally vary depending on the source and time, and there are absolutely times when Jin surely feels angry, sad, or exhausted privately away from the cameras, his unwavering consistency in consciously choosing a relaxed, humorous attitude for the sake of the group's overall harmony and mental survival highly deserves to place him at the very top tier of this emotional resilience ranking, proving that sometimes the greatest form of patience is simply choosing to smile and move forward when you have every right to be frustrated. Number 2. RM. In the second spot on this list is RM, who constantly carries a very specific, uniquely terrifying, and incredibly heavy responsibility as the official leader, primary spokesperson, and central pillar of a pop group with an unprecedented, history-making scale of global popularity and cultural influence. RM's extraordinary level of patience and profound emotional resilience is directly tested and stretched to its absolute limits every single day through various complex layers of intense managerial tasks, high-stakes public representation, and constant internal mediation that he has to execute flawlessly and endlessly. As the main fluent spokesperson for the group, especially during their massive international promotional activities, high-profile interviews, and diplomatic schedules outside of South Korea. RM fundamentally has to be the flawless communication bridge between aggressive interviewers, curious foreign media, the highly demanding management agency, and the other 6 group members who rely heavily on his guidance. The intense cognitive process of listening to and translating often complex, culturally nuanced English questions on the spot, instantly summarizing and curating the answers from his colleagues in his head, and then seamlessly delivering them back in English with perfect, polite grammar and the exact right cultural context, requires extraordinarily sharp, unyielding mental focus. The severe mental exhaustion caused by translating languages live, often called simultaneous interpretation fatigue, is a very real, medically documented phenomenon that severely and rapidly drains cognitive energy in the human brain, simply because the brain is highly demanded to actively listen, deeply process meaning, frantically search for the correct vocabulary, and smoothly speak in 2 completely different grammatical language structures at the exact same second. Doing all of this incredibly taxing mental gymnastics live in front of a broadcast camera, where just one single wrong word choice, a slight mistranslation, or a misunderstood tone can instantly trigger massive-scale negative news, viral backlash, or severe diplomatic misunderstandings globally, creates a very terrifying, crushing psychological pressure that would easily break most normal people. Despite constantly being under such immense, suffocating pressure continuously for years on end, RM very rarely shows any visible signs of panic, annoyance, or frustration in public, which solidly proves his very wide, deep threshold of patience and professional composure. A very light, interesting fact about relevant human behavior here closely relates to the demanding psychological role of a professional mediator or a crisis diplomat. Psychologically speaking, a highly effective leader or mediator absolutely must have ironclad neutral emotional control abilities in any given situation. When there's an inevitable conflict of opinion among the passionate members, a creative disagreement in the studio, or when the physical schedule simply feels too torturous to endure, RM is the designated person who is heavily demanded by his position to remain cool-headed, actively listen to all the grievances and complaints without judging them immediately, and logically find fair, practical solutions that satisfy all parties involved while keeping the group's main goal intact. Willingly burying one's own deep exhaustion, personal stress, and desire to complain just to fully listen to other people's complaints is an exceptionally high level of interpersonal patience and selfless empathy. If we want to look for a highly relatable example in normal daily routines to truly grasp this, imagine you are the head of the organizing committee for a massive, heavily funded large-scale event, or the president of the student executive board on a very busy university campus. Leading up to the incredibly stressful day of the event, the main outdoor tent suddenly collapses due to a severe rainstorm. The highly anticipated food vendor arrives 3 hours late, the sound system breaks down, and several young committee members start crying loudly in sheer panic or angrily blaming each other due to the overwhelming stress. As the head leader, humanly and biologically, you certainly want to join the panic, cry, or scream in sheer anger because everything is a total disaster. But your logical brain realizes that if you, the leader, panic, the whole event will instantly be ruined beyond repair. So you forcefully take a deep breath, intensely hold back all that bubbling anger and crippling fear, actively force your voice to speak in a flat, reassuring, and calm tone, and then start handing out clear, actionable repair instructions one by one to save the day. You completely ignore your own overwhelming feelings to save the collective situation. That is the exact, precise picture of the kind of heavy emotional resilience and selfless patience practically applied by RM every single day of his career.
Furthermore, RM has a beautifully intellectual and highly philosophical approach to processing his own heavy feelings and the pressures of megastardom. When he faces severe stress, creative burnout, or profound sadness, he tends to actively seek rational explanations and quiet comfort through his thick, complex reading books, his quiet, solitary visits to various art museums around the world, or simply cycling alone in open nature, a deeply healing process affectionately known by fans as namjuning. These specific hobby activities that he consciously chooses are essentially very slow, deliberate activities that heavily require long-term observation and deep focus. Spending 3 hours standing silently looking at a single abstract painting, wandering through nature, or reading dense philosophy textbooks is a very effective, proven way to train the human brain to completely delay instant gratification, slow down a racing mind, and significantly prolong the attention span of patients. RM masterfully transforms his negative, chaotic feelings into a structured conceptual understanding, actively analyzing why exactly he feels angry, where the deep root source of that anger is coming from, and whether that anger is truly rational and productive to be vented out loud. This highly advanced intellectualization process of emotion makes him very rarely explode in unreasonable sudden anger, simply because he has already logically dismantled and analyzed the raw emotion inside his head long before it could even come out of his mouth. However, his overall position in this ranking is safely at number 2, because that unbelievably massive, relentless responsibility sometimes inevitably still shows small traces of intense physical exhaustion or very brief momentary confusion when a live situation is truly completely beyond human prediction, proving that despite his genius, he is fundamentally still a human being, processing an astronomically heavy burden in real time. Of course, the exact portion of this intense pressure and the nuanced details can naturally vary depending on the specific source, the time period, as well as exactly how relentlessly packed the group's touring schedule is in a certain month, but RM's unyielding dedication to always bravely be the first, strongest shield for his group when facing harsh public criticism and overwhelming media demands requires a very vast, incredibly deep, and very stable mental capacity, undoubtedly making him one of the most remarkably patient, wise figures who continuously learns from every single mistake without ever surrendering to the crushing circumstances of fame.
Number 1. Suga. Taking the absolute first place, widely regarded as the member who possesses the most absolute, unshakable level of patience and impenetrable emotional resilience based on thousands of observations of his highly consistent, grounded behavior from the very beginning of his career until now, is Suga. What firmly puts Suga at the very top position of this list is not simply just because he naturally looks quiet, introverted, or calm on the outside, but rather because he fundamentally possesses a highly efficient, incredibly rational mindset and an absolute masterclass level of emotional energy preservation ability that remains completely unmatched by the other members. To truly deeply understand the profound roots of his legendary emotional resilience, we absolutely have to look factually and respectfully at the incredibly harsh background of his early life struggles. Long before he ever achieved his current unimaginable financial success and global popularity, Suga had painfully gone through various very harsh, unforgiving life realities, including having to desperately work physically exhausting part-time jobs as a delivery career on a motorcycle just to barely afford his basic daily needs, food, and his own independent music production equipment, leading up to suffering a quite severe, highly painful physical shoulder injury from a tragic workplace accident, an injury that he terrifyingly hid from his agency for years just to be able to debut and not lose his only dream. Enduring chronic, throbbing physical pain in his shoulder every single time he had to perform aggressive, heavy hip-hop dance choreography for many years without ever complaining openly to the public or asking for pity is concrete, undeniable proof of a level of physical endurance and emotional patience that is almost entirely impossible for ordinary people to replicate without breaking down. This very real, gritty, and harsh life experience slowly and permanently shaped his overall mentality to be highly pragmatic, incredibly grounded, and utterly realistic. Because he has seen the absolute bottom, he is not easily dazzled or blinded by excessive, shallow praise from the industry, and he is definitely not easily crumbled or destroyed by sharp, baseless criticism from anonymous haters. Suga understands the fundamental law of cause and effect in real life very well, which logically makes him always act and react based on calm, calculated, logical reasoning rather than mere momentary, highly volatile emotional impulses. Furthermore, his main, deeply beloved profession as a meticulous music producer also largely determines and exercises his astronomical patience level on a daily basis. A light, fascinating fact about the hidden behavior behind professional, high-level music production is that this grueling process requires sitting perfectly still inside a cold-temperature, isolated recording studio for a dozen hours non-stop, often entirely alone, merely staring blankly at a complex computer screen, arranging hundreds of intricate layers of musical instrument recordings, meticulously shifting audio frequencies a few microscopic millimeters repeatedly to find the exact right sound, writing dozens of vulnerable lyric drafts that will eventually be deleted and rewritten again, and silently enduring agonizing writer's block when creative ideas simply do not come. This specific profession is literally a long-term, sanity-testing patience test, where the brilliant results of weeks or months of sleepless hard work are sometimes only consumed and enjoyed by casual listeners for a mere 3 minutes. Suga has religiously practiced this exact maddening routine almost every single day for a decade, which heavily trains his brain to be very accustomed to painfully long processes, highly tolerant of extreme boredom, and unfazed by delayed results. In the unpredictable, often chaotic daily group dynamics, Suga is the absolute ultimate expert in managing emotional energy expenditure. When the other 6 members are making a very loud, chaotic noise in the small dressing room because of playing random physical games, arguing playfully, or just joking around with a booming voice, Suga very often just sits quietly in the corner, calmly observing their chaos with a totally flat, unbothered face and continuing his own quiet activity on his phone or laptop without feeling the slightest bit disturbed or annoyed. This absolutely does not mean he doesn't care about his friends, but rather his highly analytical brain realizes that loudly reacting to something entirely non-threatening or unimportant will only waste his valuable calories and precious mental energy in vain.
To give a very easy-to-understand, highly illustrative, everyday example of this specific mindset, imagine you are inside a crowded house and suddenly there is a complete power outage at night. Everyone else in that house might immediately scream in shock, run around frantically bumping into chairs because it's pitch dark, panic loudly while searching for their phones, and immediately complain about the heat because the fan died. Amidst that loud mass panic, you, who have a calm trait exactly like Suga, would not make the slightest sound of surprise. You would remain sitting perfectly calmly in your exact position for a few necessary seconds until your eyes naturally adjust to the darkness. Slowly and methodically feel the table next to you to find the emergency flashlight you placed earlier, then walk slowly and safely to the electrical switch box to see if a simple fuse tripped, and resolve the entire issue without the need to talk at length or raise your voice once. This highly pragmatic approach to life that constantly focuses entirely on practical solutions rather than emotional reactions is exactly what makes him very immune to unnecessary interpersonal drama or manufactured stress. Suga's legendary emotional resilience also looks very prominent, beautiful, and healing from the brutally honest advice he often gives his fans in various interactions and broadcasts. He is a person who bravely and openly says that it is perfectly okay if someone does not have a big, grand dream, as long as that person is generally happy every day, and it is entirely okay to just stop and rest when you are tired. This grounded advice fiercely contradicts the toxic social pressures of modern hustle culture that always tell young people to work hard relentlessly until they burn out, and his quiet courage to defy the norm of that heavy societal pressure shows that he has attained a very well-established, unshakable internal peace. When faced with intense hatred, disrespect, or doubt from the public or the hip-hop community, Suga consistently and brilliantly turns his raw anger into incredibly sharp, critically acclaimed song lyrics and high-quality music production, a highly effective psychological coping process called productive emotional channeling or sublimation, where instead of uselessly arguing with trolls on social media, he patiently delays his emotional response until he can answer them definitively and profitably through his undeniable professional work. The literal God-tier self-control, the grounded attitude that is not easily influenced by the chaotic surrounding environment, and the full, unwavering focus on rational problem-solving are exactly what solidify his position as the absolute individual with the thickest, most impenetrable emotional defense among the seven. Bearing in mind that the nuanced details can naturally vary depending on the specific source, the time period, as well as their personal continued character development from year to year, Suga heavily remains consistent in showing the entire world that true absolute patience is the rare ability to endure quietly in the middle of a bad situation without ever losing your sanity, your core identity, and without ever feeling the desperate need to prove anything to anyone in a frantic rush.